It started with a phone call in the deep dark of a Tuesday, the kind of night where the street outside my building only answered to itself, and the radiator in my hallway clicked like a distant heartbeat. I remember the date the way people remember small betrayals, the month and a smell. It was late March, and the apartment smelled faintly of lemon and laundry detergent because I had washed the sheets that afternoon. My name is Elena. I was 36 then, freelance editor, living alone after a divorce that had taught me how to measure time by the pauses in conversation rather than by the clock. I had been in this neighborhood for 5 years, the top floor of a building with creaky stairs and a landlord who kept a jar of spare change in his drawer. I liked that nothing dramatic ever happened here. I liked the neighbors with their predictable rhythms, the cat that belonged to Mrs. Ortiz who liked to sleep on my windowsill, the little Greek bakery 2 blocks down whose ovens sang at dawn. I knew where to buy butter on a rainy Sunday and who would lend a ladder if I needed to change a bulb. I thought these quiet things were defenses, because you can get used to feeling safe, I suppose, because safety is, for many of us, a list of small truths we repeat under our breath. I lock the door, I check the windows, I know my neighbors. Then the phone rang from my own number. The first time it happened, I laughed without thinking, a short laugh, then felt my stomach drop. My phone screen flashed my own contact photo back at me. I answered, because who else takes a call from their own number if not the person who knows them best? A voice spoke, a whisper that sounded like someone practicing how to be familiar. "You always leave the back light on," they said. I told the story to myself later and tried to make it ridiculous, like a prank, like a wrong number. But at that moment, my hands remembered what the electricity bill had been, the way I used to stand at the sink and look out through the window over the yard. The call hung on the line, breathing through the speaker. I asked, "Who is this?" The voice repeated, "You always leave the back light on." Then the line went dead, and my living room, with its cushions and a steaming mug I had left half full, shifted in a way that made the air colder. That evening began a sequence of small, precise intrusions that would teach me that violence does not always arrive as a crash. Sometimes it arrives like someone slowly learning the pattern of your life, filling in the spaces between your habits. Before I go on, and before you start thinking this is only about me, I need to tell you that what follows are 10 separate accounts gathered over many months from people I met, people who wrote to us, people who sat across from me at kitchen tables and told their stories in the language of disbelief. Each case is different and yet the same in the ways that haunt the home. I will tell them all. I will start with my own because it led to conversations with neighbors who later became characters in all the other stories. And because the phrase they used that first night haunted us all. They called from my own number. I will give names not to expose, but to hold the rhythm of memory. The main cast you will meet more than once is small and oddly domestic. Mrs. Ortiz, the cat owner, whose jasmine-scented laundry line smelled like summer even in winter. Ethan, the young father obsessed with his lawnmower. Claire, the landlord with the key that never seemed to fit any lock properly. Jason, my neighbor who repaired things for a living. Detective Lee, who would later appear in more than one report. Officer Morales, who took notes like he could stitch sense back into a torn thing. Alicia, my friend who works in cybersecurity and taught me what to watch. Ben, the technician who installed cameras, and Maria, a courier who found truth in slips of paper. Some of them will be present only in memory. Some will become crucial witnesses. Some will appear as tiny turns of fate, like a missing shoelace. The first block in every account is always ordinary life. For me, that meant a morning where I brewed coffee, the bitter scent chap against the cotton of my sweater, the sun making a trapezoid of light on the kitchen counter. A cat brushed past my leg and left a damp paw print against the tiles. I had a stack of manuscripts on the table and a hummed playlist coming from an old speaker. I had the habit of checking the deadbolt twice each evening and of leaving the porch light on until midnight. Those details read now like a list of proofs that identity can be mapped onto objects. The ordinary contained its own textures: the scratch of a pen, the rasp of the zipper on my tote bag, the metallic tang in the air when rain begins, the soft cotton of my bed sheets at the nape of my neck. And yet, the smallest thing would twist the familiar. The week after that first call, a man stood at the end of the block under a yellow street lamp and looked up at my apartment as if he had memorized the angle of the curtains. I saw him because I had moved to the window to check a sound, and his silhouette froze in my memory like a bad photograph. For the second block in my story, the incident escalated. It was not dramatic at first. There were messages without a sender. A folded note tucked under my welcome mat that said simply, "We watch the light." There was a smear of mud on the back step that did not match the neighbor's shoes. There was a delivery left in the wrong place with a receipt that had my apartment number circled in a handwriting I did not recognize. I called the non-emergency line. 10 minutes later, Officer Morales arrived, pulled on blue nitrile gloves with a careful, practiced motion, and asked soft questions. He asked me to tell him exactly what had happened, and I said the words with a steadiness I did not feel. A call came from my number, and a note was on the mat, and there was mud on the step. He nodded, took notes, asked how long I had lived there, asked whether I had enemies. I told him about the divorce and the men who were gone now. He said, "People often overestimate threats, but always report what feels wrong." He asked if I wanted a patrol check tonight, and I did not know whether I wanted to say yes, because asking for patrols felt like admitting that something had pierced my private bubble. That night I lay awake and listened to the radiator click and to the distant subway tremor at the walls. I had exchanges with the dispatcher on the phone. "We will note it," she said. "If you receive more calls, report them." The third block, where evidence begins to stack, came with small proofs that are impossible to dismiss once you see them as a pattern. A scratch on the latch at the back door. A cigarette butt behind the hedge, even though neither I nor my neighbors smoke. And later, 2 photos sent to me by a courier named Maria, who found them on the stoop. They were grainy smartphone images of my backyard at dawn. The angle matched to my kitchen window. And in one of them, a shadow leaned against the fence the way a person leans when they think no one is watching. I called Aisha at midnight. She said, "This is a classic pre-attack pattern. They are collecting data. These are the small intrusions before they decide to test a threshold." I repeated the word threshold because hearing it aloud made it more precise. I wrote down the names of everyone I could think of. I spoke with Jason, who knocked on my door the next afternoon, toolbox in hand. "You sure you don't want me to put a new bolt on?" he asked. We had a dialogue, a back and forth, with format like an old play. "I can do it tonight," he said. "No, not tonight," I replied. "I think I should do this myself," he said. "That's not safe." "I know," I answered, "but it feels like a declaration." We went on like that, voices dropping and rising, 10 little exchanges where we circled the same decision until a plan emerged. Those conversations were the smell of oil from Jason's bag, the grit of metal when he tapped the bolt, the pale smell of his aftershave in the doorway, the way the light fell on the parquet like a cut of silver. The fourth block, repetition and harassment, is where patterns become rules. The calls continued, always from my own number. Once, around 2 in the morning, my phone rang with my own ringtone, and when I answered, a recorded breathing played on loop. Another time, a bouquet of flowers arrived at the door with no card, their petals damp and smelling faintly of the florist's preservative. Once, someone rearranged the welcome mat so that the letters spelled nothing. Messages arrived on the community app from an anonymous account watching the building cam footage. "Nice curtains," it said. "We like the way you leave the balcony light." These were not violent acts in the conventional sense. They were invasions that turned private rituals into open pages. I installed a camera with Ben, the technician, who arrived with equipment in a case that smelled like plastic and old coffee. He and I had a long technical conversation about bandwidth, encryption, cloud storage, about the importance of chain of custody if anything was to be used as evidence later. I recorded his explanation because it felt like a small armor. He said, "You need continuous recording to avoid gaps. We timestamp and hash the footage so it can be verified later." For anyone watching this who has ever had to explain chain of custody in plain language, think of it as assigning fingerprints to each file so the police can say this is exactly what was captured and it has not been altered. That sentence of his sat with me because it made the intangible tangible. The police were helpful in small ways and frustrating in actual ones. Detective Lee attended a follow-up and talked to me in patient, precise sentences. He asked where the camera should point, what times the calls happened, who had access to my building. He took a report and then emailed me a case number. His professionalism made me feel less alone. Yet when I asked what came next, he said the quiet truth. "We act on evidence, Elena. Threats that are non-violent but targeted make prosecutions difficult." I remember the clean office smell, the sound of a pen on paper, his thumb tapping the case file. It felt like a promise held at bay. In the fifth block, the community response and the limitations of institutions appeared stark. Neighbors gathered. We formed a WhatsApp group with profiles and mugshot emoji, and Claire, the landlord, offered to change the locks. But locks are only as good as the people who check them. There was a meeting in the building hallway that smelled of frying onions from someone making dinner nearby. Officer Morales came to the meeting and tried to explain in accessible language the steps we could take. "If you want immediate safety," he said, "you should consider changing access points, adding more light, and recording any contact you have. We will increase patrols when possible, but we need evidence to hold someone. If you get a call, do not hang up right away, record the time, and save voicemails." His voice was steady. But when he left, we all felt the bluntness of the real constraint. Police needed proof that would stand up in court. The sixth block, the climax and confrontation, arrived not as a break in the night, but as an accumulation of thresholds crossed. One afternoon, I found a small slip of paper tucked under my pillow. It was a receipt from a cafe 2 blocks away, my favorite cafe in town. Who had been in my bedroom to place it there? I called Detective Lee, and he asked me to keep the paper. He said, "Do not touch anything else. We will send someone to collect and process." The forensic technician who came wore a blue suit and blue gloves and explained in plain terms about trace evidence. He swabbed the receipt, sealed it in a transparent evidence bag, and explained the protocol in 300 words that were crystalline. The swab was placed into a sterile container, labeled with the time and date, and signed by the handler to maintain an unbroken chain of custody. He said the lab would test for DNA, fingerprints, and fiber traces, and that results could take weeks. That small technical description made me feel like the science might stitch reality back together. 2 days later, an encounter forced a decision. I returned home early because I had forgotten a file in the living room. The building corridor was dim, the light above my door buzzing. I heard a muffled sound and then a silhouette at the end of the hall, a figure pressing itself into shadow near the stairwell. My heart did something that felt like a physical refusal. I looked at my phone and it read 6:14 p.m. I stepped back. The figure did not move. I felt the skin at the back of my neck tighten. I walked faster, keys in hand, and the figure melted into a shape that might have been a man or might have been a coat hung on a railing. I called out, "Hello?" A voice replied from further down the corridor, "Everything okay?" It was Jason with his toolbox. He came to the door and we had the kind of dialogue that fills a small room. "Did you see someone?" I asked. "I thought I heard something," he said. "No, nothing," I answered. "We should call," he said. "Yes," I said, "call the patrol." "I'll wait with you," he said. "Okay," I said. It was a brief exchange, 12 small turns about whether to call, whether to stay, whether to go and get others. We decided to wait, and it felt like the only right choice. A world where decisions are tested. The moment of tension compressed into minutes that stretched like rubber. The fear was an animal that put its teeth in my throat. It was one of 5 moments like that which must be described in detail. The first of those moments, the confrontation in the corridor, had the metallic scent of the stairwell, the scrape of an unseen shoe on concrete, the faint hum of the street outside, and the taste of copper in my mouth from adrenaline. The second came weeks later when my camera captured a person moving in the garden between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see a hooded figure pause beneath the window and look up as if studying a painting. I replayed the footage until the pixels were letters forming a sentence I did not want to read. A neighbor named Ethan watched it with me and said, "I would have recognized that jacket." He remembered someone who had been in the building last winter doing odd jobs. We compared details in a string of exchanges that felt almost like a trial of witness statements. That moment had the smell of wet earth, the cold point of wind under the eaves, the tactile grit of the thumbnail on the screen when I froze the image. The third moment of tension arrived when a loud crashing sound woke me in the night, and I found my back gate was open. I remember the texture of the wood under my hand, the dampness of the grass blades that stuck to my shoes, the smell of diesel from a passing delivery truck, and the feeling of being naked in a place I had thought private. The fourth moment was the first true threat, a voicemail left at 3:45 in the morning that said, "We know when you are asleep." The voice was not loud, but it had that particular ordinary confidence of someone who had practiced cruelty as if it were a hobby. At that point, the police increased the patrol. Ben added more cameras to cover every angle, and I took steps that changed my life in small but permanent ways. The seventh block, the immediate aftermath and decisions, forced a reconfiguration of the domestic. I moved the furniture so that the couch blocked sightlines to the kitchen from the window. I stopped leaving my keys on the hook by the door. I started sleeping with a lamp on in the hallway instead of the living room. Simple things became relics of safety. I sold a bedside lamp on a community group because it had a cracked shade the same color as the one left on my porch, and it made me feel like I was discarding any object that might be a memory of someone else's presence. Claire offered me a temporary lower rent arrangement in another unit until the case closed, and the landlord agreed to replace the old door latch with a modern deadbolt. Those practical decisions came with the soft, intimate labor of packing, the weight of books and boxes, the scratch of tape, the smell of cardboard. People close to me became actors in this small drama. Aisha monitored my accounts and changed passwords. Ben stayed late to program the cameras so they recorded constantly and uploaded to the cloud. Jason helped me move heavy furniture at an hour when the world is not polite to bodies. Maria brought flowers once and left without talking. Detective Lee advised patience and documentation. Officer Morales checked in with a knock that sounded like concern. If you are wondering whether this all culminated in a neat arrest, the truth is more complicated. The eighth block, the epilogue in time, is where consequences and learning get their due. 1 month later, I had installed additional lights, changed locks, and held a small neighborhood meeting. People who used to avoid one another now exchanged glances that were softer, involved. 3 months later, I was sleeping on the opposite side of the bed with a camera trained on my front stoop and with a friend staying over occasionally. 6 months later, I had moved into a smaller place across the river with a door that closed with a satisfying thunk. The case file remained open with intermittent updates. For months, we received strange calls and sometimes red herrings, but a match on a DNA database eventually led police to a person who had once been a repairman in our building and who had been seen by Ethan working on roofs last winter. He was questioned, and there was a small courtroom scene months later where Detective Lee explained chain of custody and prosecutor read the reports aloud. The public outcome was not a neat finality, but it did bring a kind of closure for some of us in small ways. After 6 months, many of us had changed our routines permanently, and that is a kind of cost that is often ignored when we talk about safety. That is my own story, condensed here because the larger project was to gather 10 lives that had been touched by the same strange phenomenon. calls that arrived from a victim's own number, messages that were intimate because they referenced daily habits, intrusions that were intimate because they were built from the inside out. The second account came from Jason, the handyman who lived 2 doors down. He told me about the night he fixed a neighbor's fence and later found a single screw on his kitchen counter that he did not recognize. His father had taught him how to repair things, and he always smelled of grease and lemon oil. He was 38, single, someone who could read old locks and new problems with the same eye. His backstory is simple and long enough to matter. He grew up on a small farm where evenings smelled like wood smoke and old tools. He trained as a mechanic, moved into the city, and started a small business, a van with a dent that he called Chloe. He lost his mother young, and that absence made him precise about objects, like a person who organizes letters as a way to name the missing people. He had been in my building for 7 years, and he knew the names of every neighbor's cat. One night, his phone rang from his own number. A voice said, "You fix what people hide." Jason thought it was a joke until someone left a screwdriver on his stoop with his name carved into the handle. The screwdriver had the smell of engine oil and a red plastic grip. He had a long conversation with me and with Detective Lee where he explained how things like tools carry identity because of dents and smudges. In his account, the antagonist seemed like a person who had been studying him, and his backstory of loss and skill made him vulnerable because he often took work at odd hours and let strangers into his van to pay in cash. The third account was from Maria the courier who collected packages at dawn and once found a note shoved in the flap of her satchel. She had the voice of someone who walks streets before day and knows the sound of shutters opening. Her backstory included a childhood of traveling with a family that never stopped moving and a habit of always checking the underside of benches. Her note read, "We see where you hide your stamps." She laughed at the absurdity at first, then stopped when a package went missing and her employer doubted her. Maria's narrative highlighted how workers with irregular hours can be targeted precisely because their routines are predictable from the outside. The fourth was Ethan, the young father who found footprints on his son's bedroom carpet. He had curly hair and a habit of humming while mowing the lawn. His backstory had an early life where neighborhoods were transient and loyalty was tested by small thievery. When he found the footprints, he confronted the landlord and they disagreed about whether it constituted a breaking in. Months later, CCTV from a neighbor confirmed a person had been on his balcony at night. Ethan's story included long dialogues with neighbors and the police where his fear and the fear of his partner, Laura, played out in practical arguments about locks and alarm systems. The fifth story centered on Claire, the landlord, who had keys that opened more than one apartment because of old master locks. Her backstory was municipal and bureaucratic. She had inherited the building from an uncle and kept vacuums in a closet because patchwork maintenance was her way to keep tenants from leaving. When tenants began reporting odd incidents, she experienced a bureaucratic clash with the city, who demanded paperwork and decades of permits. Her exchanges with Officer Morales were tense when the paperwork did not offer the immediate remedy people wanted. She was forced to weigh cost against safety and, in the end, replaced several locks, a choice that rippled into rent increases and resentments. The sixth was a case from Ben, the technician, who installs security systems and who once received a call from his number while he was in a client's living room. He had learned wiring in community college and had a small son whose toys lined his van. He became obsessed with the idea that his own tools might be used to track homes, because systems can be both shields and portals when misconfigured. He had a long dialogue with the manufacturer and with Aisha. The exchanges were heated and technical, with 14 small turns about firmware and default passwords, each sentence dense with terms that would make a homeowner's head spin. The seventh account came from Aisha herself, the cybersecurity consultant who told 2 stories at once. She had a backstory of studying networks in a university lab and a present life of debugging other people's digital lives. Her claim was chilling because it showed how simple social engineering can be. She described a woman, 32, living alone and receiving an email that appeared to come from her router vendor. The email invited a firmware update that, when installed, gave the intruder a window into the cameras. The dialogue between the woman and Aisha was long and technical, but also human. 12 turns of fear and calm as they removed the software, reset passwords, and re-established privacy. The 8th was a case about a retired schoolteacher named Harold who had been a quiet figure in his cul-de-sac and found a single bullet mark in his railing. He had a backstory steeped in patience and the smell of chalk. The mark led to a note folded in his mailbox that said, "We can come closer." He reported it to the police, who recommended that he not change anything until forensic teams could collect evidence. The 9th was a story of a young couple who found a stranger sleeping in their basement after a party. They had been drinking and left a door ajar and later found themselves the subjects of a social media trend accusing them of inviting trouble. Their friends supported them, but the incident changed their sense of being safe at home. The 10th was a more complicated legal tangle, where a woman named Nina found evidence suggesting someone had used her social media check-ins to map her absence. Her case moved slowly through the police because IP addresses are messy and because the person who had done it had used proxies. Across these 10 stories, common threads appear that I will not excuse: small sign stacking, institution limits, the smell of ordinary life becoming uncanny. Throughout, dialogues were long and necessary. In the key scenes, we spoke from many exchanges with police, with neighbors, with friends, with strangers who became witnesses. Here is an example of how. Those dialogue exchanges unfolded in one crucial scene when my neighbor Jason confronted a suspect that the CCTV had shown in the garden. The sequence lasted 12 exchanges over the course of a long evening. "Why are you in my garden?" Jason asked. "I live here," the man replied. "Not here," Jason said. "On this property." "My uncle lives here," the man said. "Which unit?" Jason asked. "Number 3, the man answered. "Number 3 has an elderly woman," Jason said. "She is my cousin," the man insisted. "We have footage," Jason said. "She is mistaken," the man said. "Come with me," Jason said. "No," the man answered. "Stay away from the windows," Jason said. "I am staying with her," the man said. "We will verify," Jason said. "You are not making sense," the man said. "You are on camera," Jason said. "Maybe," the man said. "We will go to the landlord and police," Jason said. "You must not," the man answered. It is an exchange that shows how many sentences can be used to either build confusion or to pin a reality down. Sensory detail in each of the 10 accounts is relentless and necessary. In one story, the smell of frying onions was the signal a neighbor used to note a time of day. In another, the taste of copper in the mouth was what adrenaline left behind after a stairwell confrontation. We noted 6 to 7 sensory details in every important scene because intimacy of place is a central actor. The sense of sight carried images: the grainy CCTV frame, the slit of light under the door, the pattern on a scarf left on the fence. Sound offered the ring that came from a number that matched the victim's own. Smell revealed the florist's preservative on flowers left anomalously. Touch told of mud on the step, of the grit on the thumb when someone handled an envelope, of the weight of keys heavy in a palm. Taste came rarely but always at crucial moments because taste often returns with adrenaline. The texture of memory is built from these elements. Throughout these narratives, there are moments of tension, 3 to 5 in the most important accounts that are each 500 to 600 characters when they stand alone. Not long when excerpted, but enough to make the skin prickle. The first of these was the corridor silhouette I described earlier. The second was the hooded figure in the garden captured at 2 a.m. The third was the voicemail saying, "We know when you sleep." The fourth was finding the receipt under my pillow. Each of those moments had internal conflict, a memory surge, and then a decision point. Call the police or not? Stay or go? Change the locks or wait for the lab? Those decisions shaped the rest of the stories. When we reached the broader community implications, some people learned practical steps. In the conversations we had with Detective Lee and Officer Morales, we folded in technical process, descriptions that anyone could understand. For example, in one meeting, Detective Lee explained how an investigation proceeds. He said, first, we take a report. We collect physical evidence like prints and swabs. We log everything with timestamps. For digital evidence, we preserve devices and make bitwise copies so the original is untouched. We then submit to the lab for analysis. If forensic matches come back, we proceed with an interview under caution. If those interviews give probable cause, we can apply for warrants. That short 300-wordish explanation was meant to demystify the process. It did not make it faster, but it made it comprehensible. I will not hide the frustrations. Many of the people I interviewed found police protocols infuriatingly slow. Some cases never moved beyond unable to locate. Others culminated in quiet victories, like an arrest after a DNA match from a cigarette butt found near a back gate. In one case, a neighbor installed a camera and caught a person on a ladder at dawn removing a package. His footage led to an arrest. In another, the trail of small intrusions led nowhere prosecutorially, but did force a landlord to replace locks and to enforce guest registers. There is also a darker theme that emerges, which is how easily one can be gaslit into doubting one's own senses. Many of the victims were told, to their faces or in subtler ways, that they were overreacting. Some landlords called complaints exaggerated. Some neighbors said it is probably kids. That dismissal is itself part of the harm, because it isolates the person whose privacy was violated. Our community conversations changed that, slowly. At about a third through these stories, I inserted a pause, a direct invitation, because community is crucial in these situations. Imagine you are at that table with us. If you had been in their shoes, what would you have done first? I want to know. Leave a comment with your first action starting with "I would," so others can see practical, immediate responses. Like, I would call the police. I would install a camera. I would bring a friend to stay. These comments help because they create a catalog of ordinary wisdom and possible actions that have helped others. Many viewers have taught us clever, practical things, like how to set up motion lights that do not trigger false positives from cats, how to create an emergency list with neighbors, and how to preserve voicemails and screenshots for evidence. Those community contributions have been life-saving in small ways. As these accounts closed, most protagonists took tangible steps. Some moved, some sold houses, some changed locks, some installed multiple cameras synced to professional monitoring. Some started sleepovers with friends. The costs were not only economic. People reported losses of trust, diminished ease, the conversion of rooms into command centers rather than refuge. Many told me that the emotional aftermath persisted long after the cameras had recorded nothing. One woman explained how she could no longer feel comfortable in the bathtub because it had become an exposed place during an intrusion. There were also stories of recovery and of civic repair. Neighbors formed watch groups. The landlord instituted guest logs. Tenants learned to support one another by driving someone home at night. Courts sometimes offered restitution and sometimes did not, but community action often produced immediate safety, even when institutions lagged. In the months following these events, some unexpected things happened. I found that people who had been strangers became friends by virtue of vigil. We had potlucks where we shared security tips. We started a lending library for tools so no one had to contact strangers late at night alone. And we created a spreadsheet with trusted locksmith contacts. The epilogue is purposeful because time reshapes trauma. 1 month after the final recorded incident in my case, the building felt differently. People looked out more, lights were on more often, and the cat on my sill spent afternoons in a different window. 3 months after the arrests in 2 of these cases, we saw community patrols form and a small fund to install lighting on the block. 6 months out, there were still dreams colored by fear for some, new routines for others, and a strange sort of pride in the neighborhood's ability to respond collectively to an intimate violation. There are lessons I want to leave you with,
not as moralizing directives, but as practical things that might make a difference if you ever find yourself in one of these situations. Trust small things that are repeated. Keep records of calls and saved voicemails. Use cameras with encrypted cloud backups if you can. Make safety a social activity. Tell a neighbor and create a plan. When authorities ask for documentation, provide it, even if the process seems slow, because paper and pixels can be stitched into a legal thread later. If you can, consult a cybersecurity expert about router settings and default passwords. Replace locks if the landlord will not. And most of all, do not allow people to tell you you are overreacting when your instincts are trying to keep you safe. I will close this long account with a short remembrance. The feelings left behind from living in fear are not always visible scars. They are habits. Leaving a light on in the hallway, checking the peephole 3 times, asking a friend to stay over after a strange voicemail. They are the little rituals that try to stitch the slow tear. For me, the final move across the river bought distance and some peace. I still check locks, but I also sleep with more ease. For others, the outcome was different. Some were lucky, some were not. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think, please take a moment to comment with what you would do first in that situation, and to share any small safety tip that helped you. If you want more stories like this that blend
practical guidance with first-person accounts, consider subscribing, because we will keep bringing forward narratives that are meant to make us safer and more connected. In the end, I learned a quiet, hard lesson. Homes can be invaded not only by force, but by attention, by someone learning the score of your days and moving to play it. Guard your small routines not because they are dramatic, but because they are intimate and therefore valuable. Home is where we shelter our sleep and our small private gestures. Protecting that is not only a practical act, but a claim on a life you have the right to keep.